And we do this by investing in research, policy solutions, and civic leadership to create systems-level changes that improve lives for women and families. As a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, we work to unite people around policy issues to empower women and their families. So today, we're very excited to be hosting our second educational webinar with NAWBO. This webinar series is part of our partnership to educate women on how to make a positive impact and build skills that will benefit their businesses and communities. Today's topic on caregiving challenges is one that has been a key initiative and priority for us at United We. I want to thank you all for taking time to join us for this important conversation. And now I'll pass it over to Dr. Jan with NAWBO.
Thank you for the introduction, Wendy. We are excited to continue partnership with United We as we both work together to empower women entrepreneurs to serve economic, social, and political spheres of power worldwide. As mentioned, my name is Janice Shinkawa, and I am a member of the NAWBO National Board, as well as NAWBO's National Advocacy Chair, leading our advocacy efforts on behalf of the nation. I would like to introduce Adrienne Schwer. Adrienne is a fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center and leads their Paid Family Leave Task Force. While Adrienne is a Nebraska native, she is not new to our nation's capital. During her tenure, she has worked on numerous initiatives on behalf of women. In 2015, Schwer started a nonprofit organization called Family Leave Works to find bipartisan solution to paid family leave. She has worked across the aisle to shape policy and help corporations elevate stories of how paid family leave is good for businesses. Then in 2018, she helped the Bipartisan Policy Center stand up the first bipartisan paid family leave task force. I'll let Wendy introduce our other speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Jan. We also have joining us today, Missouri Senator Lauren Arthur and Kansas Representative Laura Williams with us today to talk about the policy implications as an extension of family-friendly workplaces. By introduction, Senator Lauren Arthur was re-elected in 2020 to represent the constituents of the 17th Senatorial District in the Missouri Senate. This year, she has passed a bill that extends postpartum coverage for new moms. Prior to her time in the Missouri Senate, Senator Arthur also served 4 years in the Missouri House of Representatives. Senator Arthur attended Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. She then returned back to Kansas City, which is home, to join Teach for America and previously worked as a middle school teacher. She also has master's in education from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. So welcome, Senator Lauren. From Kansas, we have Kansas State Representative Laura Williams. Representative Williams is a small business owner with a background in digital marketing. She took office earlier this year and was a committed community advocate prior to joining the House of Representatives. She has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Kansas. And thank you all to Adrienne, Senator Arthur, Representative Williams for joining us today. And now we'd like to turn it over to Adrienne, who will be our first presenter, who will discuss paid family leave. Adrienne?
Thank you so much for having me. I want to start by saying it's pretty rare that I get to be on a national discussion with 3 women from the Midwest. So Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas unite today. I'm excited to see what we can do together. So first of all, I'm so eager to talk about caregiving and at the intersection of owning businesses. Many of you deal with workforces who are constantly dealing with childcare, elder care, personal care, and the many different facets of caregiving that are affecting workers today. We know and are doing some research right now on one of the key reasons why people are out of work and not looking for work is often that they are balancing really important family caregiving responsibilities. And my dream is that we can find more policies and more solutions that support small businesses to better help those workers balance work and life and make sure that you're able to meet your business needs and maintain, the successful entrepreneurial nature of our country. So if you can move to the next slide, I thought I'd start at the state level and then move to the federal level. I love paid family and medical leave. It is my thing. It is what I care about the most. It is this policy that I truly believe is transformational for a lot of workers because it's about finite times when you can't continue to work full time. It's not getting sick. It's not like getting the flu. It's having a baby. It's getting hit by a car. It's suffering from severe mental illness that makes you unable to work. It's a family member getting cancer. Real life events that make it so you can't go to work for significant periods of time. This is a policy enacted 30 years ago that protects your job, called FMLA, and frames out an idea of paid family and medical leave. So what am I talking about? Parental leave is often talked about. That's taking care of new babies, birth, adoption, and foster of a new young one entering your family. Family caregiver leave. This is increasingly important with an aging population, but a lot of people in America are caring for loved ones. It might be a disabled child. It might be a disabled adult family member. It might be an aging family member, but it's really hindering their ability to work full time. And medical leave. And medical leave has really changed. It used to be getting hit by a car or, a true physiological impact. And in today's world, it tends to be a lot more mental and behavioral health issues. Addiction falls right in this category that are taking people out of work. Paid leave can help protect that time for, in different states, it's architectured different ways, but often it's discussed at like up to 12 weeks where you can leave work, come back to your job, get paid during that time, and your company knows the exact structure of that benefit and or that time that you have off. So if you can go to the next slide. When I first started working on this issue, 12% of Americans had a defined paid family leave benefit. That has nearly doubled in today's world. We have 18 states that have passed paid leave laws in the last 15 years. They don't all look alike. Some of the blue coastal states that you see in pink have broad social insurance programs where they're, if you are a small business in that state, your employees can benefit from a state program. It's a little bit of payroll taxes, either from the worker or from the employer. And then in some of the middle states that are passed or, just starting to be enacted, those things tend to be for like opening up the architecture for short-term disability insurance for private sector products to expand and cover all those 3 types of leave I just talked about. But there's a pretty good, I'm happy to share more details, and BPC has some really good content on each of these states if you're trying to learn what there is in your locality. But what I was going to spend time on today is talking about what's happening at the federal level. So move over to the other slide, please. At the federal level, like I mentioned, there's a 30-year-old law, FMLA. This protects your job. This does not have any dollars associated with it. So I just thought I'd share that. Most of you know about it, but if you're a small business owner with less than 50 employees, this does not apply to you, right? Your employees are exempt from this law. Next slide. What we're seeing at the federal level is a bold conversation about ways that paid leave, the federal government could help companies provide paid leave. So there are 2 laws that exist today. One of them is FEPLA. The federal government is the largest employer in the country. It has enacted a 12-week paid parental leave law. Anyone who works for the federal government gets it. In your states, I'm sure in Kansas and Missouri, you're seeing that there's some state worker paid leave starting to move through the legislature. Set a really good example. This is a bipartisan law. The other that nobody knows about and every small business should, I call 45S. This basically says that you can get up to 25% of what you spent on helping your worker get paid time away for one of those qualifying reasons paid back to you in a form of a tax credit. It was passed during the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was the rules didn't come out for a very long time, and like nobody knows it exists. But if you're offering paid parental, family, or medical leave to your workers, think about pushing your tax attorney to help you benefit from this law because it's just money on the table. Next slide. Oh, turn it over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be part of this discussion, and I appreciate your interest in the topic. So we'll just jump in. Next slide. Next slide. So as a state senator who represents constituents in District 17 in Clay County, I was asked to share my perspective as it relates on childcare as it relates to the Missouri legislature. So today I'm going to provide a brief overview of where we've been, where we are today, and hopefully where we can go from here. Next slide. So for years, people in the childcare industry understood that Missouri has a childcare shortage. It has been an issue that was primarily viewed through the lens of the importance of children's well-being and educational development. But in recent years, the issue has expanded to a larger audience, and that's a great thing. I think the pandemic really brought it to the forefront as people became more exposed to or aware of the shortage. But prior to the pandemic, about half of the state did not have enough childcare, and that means that there were kids whose parents were looking for care, but the actual number of seats did not meet that need. Next slide. Then the pandemic hit, and the child care shortage became a child care crisis. And about 1/3 of Missouri's child care providers closed. As you can see from the map, this is a problem that touches nearly every part of the state, but the most acute needs typically are in more rural areas. Next slide. So the pandemic closings meant that an already strained industry was now even more strained, and we needed immediate action to stop this problem from getting even worse. Thankfully, there was a pretty robust response at the federal level. Next slide. The key takeaways from this are that hundreds of millions of dollars flowed into Missouri from federal legislation, and that stopped most of the closures, and it even helped a few providers reopen. But as a result, Missouri returned to pre-pandemic levels, which we just discussed is not nearly good enough. Next slide. I included this slide not really to make a political point, but I want to illustrate that there are certain political realities. There's a ton of bipartisan support to help strengthen Missouri's childcare infrastructure, but there are some disagreements, particularly in the Republican Party, about what that response should look like or the role that government should play.
Yeah.
We have, most of our elected federal lawmakers are Republicans, and some of them have voted against increased funding for childcare in the past. So we really need to get them on board and make sure that they're part of that solution going forward. Next slide. The pandemic was a wake-up call that caused a lot of other groups to engage on an issue that was not front and center in the past. And the United States Chamber of Commerce and its local affiliate, the Missouri Chamber, stepped up in really major ways. And I can't emphasize how important that this is. The bigger the coalition, the more likely we will have success on this issue. So the Missouri Chamber weighed in, and they issued a recent report with two huge takeaways. The first is a little bit obvious, but it's important. It's that childcare is an industry, and so many of the childcare providers are women-owned businesses or minority women-owned businesses, and it creates jobs, it gets money flowing in our local economies. But when that industry is underperforming, it holds the economy back. And so in Missouri, we're missing out on over $1 billion from not having enough childcare in the state. That means fewer jobs, fewer paychecks, fewer opportunities. The second big takeaway was that our childcare crisis was keeping people out of the workforce. And Missouri has workforce shortages in nearly every sector. I'm sure you all have experienced that in some form or another. And the chamber found that there are people who could be working, but they were not able to work because they're at home taking care of kids. So if they had access to quality, affordable childcare, they'd be more likely to re-enter the workforce. And that means to address Missouri's workforce shortage, we really need to address the childcare shortage. Next slide. So all of this brings us to about this time last year, and we had a bad situation that was made worse by the pandemic. The crisis caught the attention of the business community, of you all, and that's great because you all have a lot of influence in our capital. Next slide. So there's Governor Parson, and there I am behind him. He delivered the State of the State address in January of this year, and he emphasized childcare in a way that we have not seen recently, maybe ever. He proposed three things: a childcare tax credit package, which I sponsored, and that was to incentivize the private sector to step up. The second thing he proposed was using federal funds to help increase our subsidy reimbursement rate. And then he also wanted to put in a funding mechanism for ongoing funding through pre-K in our public schools. Next slide. Unfortunately, the governor didn't get everything that he asked for. The child care tax credit package received a lot of pushback from a group known as the Conservative Caucus in the Senate. The $78 million from federal funds was appropriated, but that's one-time money. And then we did expand pre-K access through local schools, but we had to do that through the budget. And we also included additional funding for private providers. Again, we did that through the budget. There just was not a lot of appetite to enact something through legislation this year. And I will admit that I was very surprised. A lot of the pushback came from male colleagues who felt that we needed to return to an era. I literally heard a male senator colleague say that he misses the days of June Cleaver sitting in the kitchen in her pearl necklace, and he didn't understand why so many women wanted to enter the workforce. Now, you all know our workforces are much stronger with women who want to work. There are a lot of one household families that depend on that income, and there are a lot of families that depend on two income households. So I think there is a lot of education that needs to happen with some of my colleagues. Next slide. So that brings us to today. We have an ongoing problem. Things aren't getting better. And some of the federal funding is starting to reach its end. Anecdotally, there was a major child care facility that just closed in my district, and we'll continue to see that unless we enact permanent solutions through the legislature. Next slide. The good news is we can double down on our strengths and also acknowledge that legislation takes a long time to pass. We still have a Republican governor, several Republican senators, and the business community engaged on this issue. So we'll keep going. And the next year could be our best chance for getting something achieved on the issue. And really, it's an important window, because after 2024, we're not sure what who the next administration will be, or what the next administration will look like, both on the state and federal level. And so, because we have a lot of people bought in on this, now is the right time to act. The good news is we have a legislature that really listens to you all, because you are most impacted. And that's why we need you all to deliver the message that this is the biggest issue and the most important thing that the Missouri legislature can do to help employers. And so I look forward to your engagement on this. We also know that it's going to take increased investment in funding and long-term solutions enacted through the legislative process. Next slide. So I just want to thank you again for engaging on this issue. If I didn't think that we could be successful on it, I would not be so committed to working on this. It's not fun to pick losing battles, but I'm working hard because I know that we can get something done, and I know with your help we will. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to join you here and talk about childcare and entrepreneurship from my kids' craft room at my parents' house. So as we're talking about childcare issues today, I have a few of my own. So this is my first term in the Kansas legislature, and when it comes to policy, I did not have as much experience, but I did have experience in the issues. Bringing the perspective of being a young mom. I had a 4-month-old daughter when I decided to start doing independent contract work for my home because I couldn't afford childcare. We made less than $40,000 a year, and having someone watch my kid as I tried to establish myself in the creative agency world just really wasn't an option. And so back from 2017 to now, it has been very challenging, but exciting to be able to be in the Kansas legislature and not only bring the experience of being a young mom, but a young working mother who established her own business and now is successful at it, running it today, while going through a lot of the barriers of not only starting a business, but with childcare and trying to always make it work and always look like I'm an established woman in the business world, and that I have my life together even though I'm trying to figure out what to do with my kids at home, or they're alongside with me, and making sure I look professional in that sphere. So I'll piggyback off of what Lauren was talking about with childcare here in the state of Kansas. It has become a talking point, and one that legislators, I don't think, can ignore any longer. Another one of my colleagues earlier this year is an older gentleman, and childcare is just really not a huge priority for him. However, he was at a water meeting talking about water in rural Kansas, and childcare came up. So it's just become unavoidable for legislators and people really wanting to find solutions to our lack of childcare opportunities and access to affordable childcare. Just some statistics about Kansas. Between 2019 and May of 2021, Kansas lost a total of 78 childcare providers and 938 total childcare slots. And so that's just from, I'm sure, what has happened in the pandemic, but even if we go back farther into 2013, we had a total of 6,202 licensed daycare facilities. And then now back in 2022, so a year ago, we had 4,427 facilities. So far fewer opportunity for working parents to be able to find that help. And so when it came to the legislature this year, there really was not a ton of solutions being presented or anything that people had been working on the year prior to try to find some solutions to these issues. We had some recommendations coming in from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. We tried to work with going through looking at our regulations process while also balancing making sure our kids are safe. And safety is a huge priority for us. And so really we came at it from a regulations perspective, but I think nothing really came to fruition from our work this past session. But I will say one thing that has been very encouraging is not only with the governor establishing early childhood task force of looking at this issue, we also had several requests from different committees, whether it's Health and Human Services or Commerce, asking for a special interim to look at childcare and to focus on legislation going into 2024. So from that work and being a first-term legislator, it was very interesting to be able to see, okay, really nothing's going on. And I have so many different business owners, moms that live next door, just, constantly coming to me, telling me about these, even in Johnson County, just the cost of childcare for them. In Johnson County alone, you can charge whatever you'd like to and whatever you can get for childcare, even though it may not be affordable. In rural Kansas, we're lacking access to providers because they just can't meet the need out there. So our childcare solutions look very different from rural Kansas to Johnson County. And we're taking that into consideration as well, as we're not going to have a one size fits all, but how can we continue to make sure we're striving to open up more childcare spots while also conducting it in a safe manner. Another piece of legislation that I worked on serving on the Committee of Commerce, Economic Development, was a piece of legislation called the Right to Start. So you may have heard it was introduced in the Missouri State House, I believe in 2021. But what this legislation did, it had different pieces that went and help find solutions for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs don't really feel represented in government and feel like they're working for them. We passed a lot of legislation helping big economic development plans happen and helping big business, but what are we doing for small business? And so this piece of legislation just started to attack at helping entrepreneurs. One of them was establishing an office of entrepreneurship, making sure that there's a liaison or a perspective being given during the legislative session of ways that we can help small business owners, how we can help people wanting to start their own business. Another piece of it was reducing or eliminating licensure fees. How can we be able to engage with these new business owners as they're filing for their business license or registering their business with this Secretary of State office. And another piece that wasn't included in the piece of legislation that I hope to work into there was some tax relief. So allowing for small business owners who start their business within 5 years to receive a tax credit or, just not paying state income tax on the first dollar amount, $50,000 that they make, or, within the first 5 years, trying to find some different tax relief for business owners as they start, because those few thousand dollars are a lot of money to people who are just starting. And that's a huge relief to them. I know for me, especially as I started my own business now back in 2017, how that tax relief would have been beneficial for me and could have helped, long-term with finding childcare solutions and helping pay and, help in those areas. So with the right to start legislation, we introduced it, and it's just a large piece of legislation that has so many different pieces to it. In Kansas, through the Department of Commerce, you all may know about it, but it's called Network Kansas. And this was something that was new to me, even being a business owner and now being in the legislature. I did not realize that we had a part in our state that was dedicated to helping business owners get connected to network with other business leaders and coalition partners to be able to, one, be successful, but two, have the resources they need in mentorship and getting connected to their local chambers and having what they need when it comes to taxes and things that business owners face. So we have this organization, part of our Commerce Department, focusing on business owners, small business owners, large business owners, and trying to help meet their needs, but we're missing the disconnect of connecting those new businesses that are coming into Kansas and making sure they know about those resources. So a little bit of looking at the right to start, we kind of saw what we were doing and where we were failing as a state and how can we make this better. And so this is something I know that we'll be focusing on next year. This was introduced by another Representative Tory Blue out in Great Bend, and both bipartisan support on this. And so I think we're excited to be able to provide something unique to entrepreneurs in Kansas, and hopefully that makes Kansas and this area a destination for people to come to know that they can start building their business and their dreams here in the state of Kansas. And so these are just two pieces of legislation that we started to work on this session. And I know continuing moving forward, I am hopeful we have solutions when it comes to childcare next year and starting to provide new opportunities for entrepreneurs here in the state of Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you all to our speakers. I want to thank Adrian. I want to thank Senator Arthur, Representative Williams, for your leadership and service and for being a champion for entrepreneurship, but primarily childcare as well. We have some time for questions and discussion. So at this moment, if you have questions, feel comfortable dropping them in the chat, or when we get to it, you can certainly unmute too and specifically ask your question. But before that, I wanted to mention we're going to launch a short survey during the Q&A to gather your feedback on today's webinar. We will also send this out afterwards in an email with the recording, but wanted to give you the opportunity while you're here to give us some feedback. So I'd like to begin with some questions for each of our panelists, and I'll start with you, Adrian. You mentioned how bipartisan efforts are helping move the needle when it comes to paid family leave. We constantly hear from business owners that the cost is the major concern for business owners. Do you think it should be a one-size-fits-all solution, or do you think differently?
It's a great question, Wendy. I feel like for people who work for large multi-state employers, the chances of them having access to a paid leave benefit, to having access to childcare supports are much higher. That is for headquarters workers, not always the hourly workers. And those are things that we can really improve upon. But it's really the largest portion of our workforce that is least likely to have these benefits work for small businesses who are struggling to make ends meet and to get through their monthly bills. And we need to be providing carrots, not sticks, and opportunities that really bring solutions forward to those employers who want to do right by their employees. Those are the types of policies where I see great opportunity in a bipartisan way. I also feel like we're seeing more momentum at the federal level with really diverse political spectrum interested in thinking about these issues in a bite-sized way instead of a huge, expensive, solely this policy way. And that's something I think is incubating at states, thanks to people like Laura and Lauren, and that is coming up into the federal side. We're seeing, really strong, staunch Republicans like Senator Lee of Utah and Senator Ernst of Iowa proposing really cool new paid leave programs at the federal level that would really benefit workers and not provide extra burden on employers and small businesses.
Great. And do you think there will be an opportunity to access grants or other resources for our small business owners and especially our micro business owners to help offset this expense?
Grants, I don't know. So Wendy, I think that there are two things. Like, how do you pay an employee who's not working, right? That's problem one on the issue I care about. The other is, as an employer, how do you get that work done when that employee is gone? What do you do to backfill? I think those are two important opportunities for two separate types of policies, and both are equally important. I could see the backfill side having some grant allocation or some interesting workforce programs that could augment it. I don't always see like grants to businesses as the paid leave solution. I think it's probably going to be designed in tax policy and a direct to employee benefit like the social insurance programs, or in incentives to buy private insurance products like short-term disability insurance or temporary disability insurance, which is what New York State has done, for example. I think that's how we'll see paid leave. Now on childcare, I think there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of those policies happen at the federal level through grants to states, and then states explore different methodologies on how to distribute those dollars. And Laura and Lauren would be much smarter on that than me.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrienne. Senator Arthur, you have several terms in office under your belt. So how have policies and awareness of the need for policies around caregiving shifted during your time in elected office?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I've served in the legislature for nearly a decade, and I always joke one legislative session is it's like a dog year. So it feels closer to like 100. I've been in the legislature for over 100 years. But I really have noticed a shift. It felt like in the first few years that I served, that caregiving was really relegated as a women's issue. Childcare in particular, it was discussed as it relates to educational attainment, which I think is still an important part of that discussion. So much development happens in the first year of a newborn's life. And so there are, scientific evidence-based reasons why we need to make sure that children are in a great environment growing up. And I think that's how the issue was framed, but it was very niche. There were a couple of lawmakers who were really passionate about it, mostly women who cared about it as a children's issue or a family issue. And over the years, I think the conversation has shifted, and there's been a greater understanding of the economic impact involved with caregiving and why how it affects, even if you don't have a small child, and even if you're not looking for childcare, why you should care about it. We were at a panel discussion the other day, and some of my colleagues just think like this is not something that the government has a responsibility to solve. And I would argue you don't have to be a law enforcement officer. You don't have to be a firefighter to care about the issue of public safety, because it affects us all. And if my neighbor's house is on fire, our entire neighborhood is in danger. Just like if my coworker can't find reliable, affordable childcare, that's going to affect my coworker's ability to show up to work, to be fully engaged in the conversations that we're having at work. So it really does affect everyone, every part of our economy. And I think that the the fact that there is a growing coalition who understand this issue's impact and importance, I think all of those people being more engaged, it has been nothing but helpful.
Thank you, Senator Arthur. Representative Williams, you often talk about your career as a legislator and how being a mom to young kids influences the way you lead. Can you give us a couple of examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I would run for office, but it took starting a business and realizing that government can influence the decisions in my home, and I need to be a part of that conversation. And I have young kids, and uniquely, there's not a ton of people that bring that perspective in the legislature. And so, like Lauren said, you don't need to have young kids to be able to see the need for childcare, but having young kids is a very easy way to bring the perspective. And being a working woman, that it seems to be a perspective that isn't represented in the legislature, and at times has elevated me into positions where I get to share my perspective because no one else has these same struggles. Luckily, our legislature is very open to, if you can't find someone to watch your kids that day, you can bring them to committee, but the committee then gets pretty interesting. And us legislators with young children always laugh, and if we brought all of our kids one day, they would begin to see the problem a little bit more clear of why childcare is important, and finding access to affordable childcare is important. And so I just see my kids as, I could continue to go on and not be a part of this discussion of, being an entrepreneur or finding childcare opportunities or focusing on my kids' school and education. And one day they're going to reap the solutions of lawmakers. And if I don't have the influence there, then who will? And where will we go as a state? And so being from Kansas and getting to experience and being raised here, it has grown me in the influence of public schools to tell me I can run for office, I can start my own business, and I'll do it while my kids are running underneath my feet. That is the Kansas I grew up in, and that's the Kansas I want to continue on. So my kids fortunately give me the constant real life perspectives of issues going on that real people face.
Thank you, Representative Williams. This is a question I'm going to ask each of you speakers. This is from Rachel. So Rachel, thank you for your question. How can we support this legislative action, what you've described? What can we do to help? And Adrienne, I'm going to start with you at the federal level on paid family leave. Anything for our audience that we can be doing?
So I will start by saying Dr. Jan and her team at NAWBO have been fabulous, thoughtful leaders in the small business community, representing women-owned small businesses and trying to drive conversation at the federal level that is both supportive of policies that help working caregivers, but not hindering the small business architecture that makes our country so great. Being a part of those discussions, helping NAWBO and other organizations like United We get involved in these conversations and prioritize them is exactly where we need to be. And I keep reflecting on what you said, Lauren, about your colleague and June Cleaver. I think there is a nostalgia for the dreams of the past, but a recognition from most Americans in leadership, men and women, that we have a different workforce today and a different family structure today, and that our country needs a different type of policy today. And I think you talking about that with your elected officials, state, local, and federal elected officials, as a workforce issue, like Lauren mentioned, as much as an infant and child development issue, is going to propel these conversations and these policies forward. So I just ask everybody, with NAWBO, with United We, with others, get involved, push these issues to the top of the agenda. That's the only way we're going to force solutions forward.
Great. Senator Arthur?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Adrienne said. Your lawmakers need to hear from you, and they need to hear that this is your number one priority, and that this should be their number one priority. As an economic issue, as a business issue, as a family's issue, I think people need to hear that. I would also say I'm not excited that we're heading into a new election cycle that brings a whole host of issues, and getting legislation through. Things become a little more political in an election year. But I do, I would ask you to, as you start thinking about who you want to support, ask the candidates where they stand on these issues, and hopefully they will have a comprehensive response and solutions or ideas that they are interested in working on. I think it needs to be part of people's campaigns, because it needs to be part of the platforms generally, and it needs to take the front and center role that it deserves. So I think in terms of the legislation, please write your lawmakers, reach out to them in whatever form you feel comfortable, but also start thinking about who you want to support down the line, because they're going to take on those leadership roles, and who you elect matters, and whether or not this remains an issue that they'll focus on and hopefully solve.
Representative Williams, anything to add?
I mean, all of those are great answers. The last one I would add is, when I read emails from people and seeing that issues that they care about, one, that's very important to me to know that these are actual pressing issues and people are watching what comes out of the legislature. Second, if there's a way that you can interact with both Lauren and I, I'll drop my email in the chat, but I would love to share with you legislation to follow next year in ways that maybe you could just provide a simple testimony of, this is what it's looked like for me, and this is how this legislation would be beneficial. It also goes a huge way to be able to hear from real people in the business world and seeing how legislation could directly impact them. So I would be happy to continue to follow up on the conversation of these topics, and I'll drop my email in the chat just so you guys have that.
Thank you. And this question is from Helen, and we'll direct this to Senator Arthur. Parents as first teachers was part of the success now seen in high functioning Missouri millennials. We had it once, but lost it. Have we looked into that investment and how it paid off?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I don't know if I can get into the specifics, but I know that there was a drop off in funding, but in recent years, we have actually increased that funding for the program. There is, to your point, there are a lot of data points that show that has really important and successful outcomes. And so I think there are a handful of advocates, particularly on the Senate side, who have really championed trying to increase funding for the program. Although there has been a drop off in the previous years, we're trying to ramp up to get back to not only the levels we saw before, but we think it's a very worthy investment and would like to go past that.
Thank you. This is a question for Senator Arthur and Representative Williams from Jan, which is a good question. Is there any discussion surrounding elder care issues happening at the state level? And let's start with Representative Williams.
Yes, so in Kansas, when it comes to elder care, I believe we've started to work on some conversations because there's just an increasing number of that need. And I know that we've passed, I believe it's the Senior Care Act. And I am blanking on what year that was passed, but helping lower income groups with elder care. But I do note that along with child care and caregiving, even with people with disabilities, I've had those conversations with the disability community and how can we be able to provide some type of paid family leave for caregivers as well. And so those are conversations that I'm having now, and I'm sure other legislators are, but trying to as we focus on childcare, also seeing that there is a growing need in our elder care and in continuing that on into that sphere.
Senator Arthur.
I would say that we have a lot of work to do in this area. I think both just starting from an education perspective and I think that there is a lot that lawmakers need to know about elder care, that maybe we just haven't been as engaged in that conversation. Although a lot of my colleagues are starting to experience challenges firsthand as they're caring for their elder relatives. So I do think that this will become a more prominent issue. One of the more important things that we've done is through the appropriations process. And over the last few years, we've increased reimbursement to providers. It's still not to where it needs to be, but there has been a pretty concerted effort in starting to increase those provider rates, both to skilled nursing facilities, but also direct service providers, and more funding for people who want to stay in their homes, and working with various organizations throughout the state who make those kinds of community-based and home-based modifications so that people can feel comfortable aging where they live. But this is something that I think there needs to be additional work and effort. And if you all have solutions, we certainly welcome that as well.
Great. Thank you. Adrian, we have one final question that we have time for. This actually is from Melissa, and I think best addressed to you. She says, I'm still unclear about how small business owners, especially those who own micro businesses, will be relieved at least part of the burden of supporting employees needing leave or childcare. As a business owner who happens to be a mom and also entering a new phase of assisting my elderly parents, I can certainly sympathize with every part of this conversation, but would like to better understand how this new important legislation will assist small businesses.
Great question. Okay, so I'm going to flip that over into the two pieces because I want to add a couple things. When I think of caregiving, I think of two categories. I think of formal caregivers, paid caregivers that live in that are working in assisted living or coming into your home-based care, like Lauren was talking about. The other is a family caregiver, who you are. You are a sandwich generation caregiver that's carrying up and carrying down. It's probably taking 10 hours a week when it first starts, and it's taking 40 hours a week or maybe full-time as it progresses. That is the spectrum where I feel like we have no policy infrastructure to support what I call unpaid family caregivers. It is the most fulfilling work. It is the most beautiful part of our families. It is often families of color that are less likely to institutionalize loved ones and keep people in the home. And we do very little to support them. And we have to start earlier identifying who is a caregiver and what we can do. You're an employer. You know how hard that is. Like, how do you give someone 10 hours a week to do something or support them when they're moving their mom to an Alzheimer's facility and it takes like 2 weeks? Those are really, really, really hard policy nuggets to unlock in a way that one size could fit all and not deeply burden employers. I think that is like a juggernaut that we haven't figured out yet. What I do believe is that there are, in now almost 18 states, there are programs for paid leave that the state runs, that businesses of any size can benefit from and employees of any size can benefit from, where the state is the one writing the checks to the worker and helping them with the financing side of that time off on the paid leave front. And I think more policies like that or federal government intervention into the states that aren't going to move in that direction is going to be really important, because you don't have the HR backbone to navigate a huge paid leave policy like IBM does. You don't have the HR backbone to navigate the local laws, the state laws, and the federal laws and how they overlap with each other to support that worker with a super unique caregiving responsibility. But you want to support them because that's what Americans are dealing with. They are truly working a 40-hour, 50-hour week and then balancing childcare needs and elder care needs. And you want them to be able to balance those things to be the best worker. So I don't have the perfect answer for you as it comes to caregiving. I think on paid leave, there are some types of paid leave that are just worth having that core infrastructure on them. And they are parental leave, in my mind, should be a bipartisan, easy to come to thing. Most people know when they're, have a little bit of time to plan and the employer has a little bit of time to plan. I think medical leave is an absolutely essential thing. If you need to leave work for a long period of time, you need to be able to come back to your job, have some supports in that time that are getting you back to work faster. one of the reasons that we end up having people that don't return to work or end up on long-term disability and completely leave the workforce is because they didn't take care of themselves in that critical time. They had a knee or a hip replacement and they didn't get the care they needed and the time off they needed to recover, and therefore ended up on long-term medical leave. All big problems that we can solve thinking about medical leave. Caregiving is a juggernaut that I've been studying for 10 years, and I don't have a perfect one-size-fits-all solution, but I feel really strongly that our country is about to hit a crisis of unmatched proportion if we don't come up with some ideas that could support small business owners and better supporting their workers in a way that doesn't make it so you can't make your bills at the end of the month.
Thank you, Adrienne, for that response. And I want to thank our speakers today for your leadership, for your knowledge, expertise that you've shared with us today. This has been a robust conversation, and there's still some active chat. So please, everyone, take some time to review the chat. We are running out of time, and at this moment, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jan.
Can you hear me this time? Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Adrienne, Senator Arthur, and Representative Williams. Personally, I'm a veterinarian and I work with a lot of women doctors and staff. And so thank you on behalf of them for all the work that you're doing. It's so important. I've learned a lot today, and I suspect our listeners today feel the same. Now, speaking of insights, I do want to share with you something very exciting that recently launched as part of the NAWBO and United We partnership, our brand new audio vignette series. Similar to a podcast episode, each vignette in this special series features a different expert sharing stories, insights, and inspiration on a different topic. We have motivational inspiration, taking the first step in your civic leadership journey, negotiating tips, and more. These vignettes are a quick listen at just 5 to 7 minutes each. You'll see both NAWBO and United We promoting them on our social media channels and websites over the next several weeks. So be on the lookout and please tune in. Back to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Dr. Jan. For those of you who are motivated and ready to take action, I invite you to stay connected with us for more opportunities and programming. Our websites and contact information are listed here. I also encourage you to learn more about United We's Appointments Project. In 2014, we launched the first of its kind program to empower women and strengthen communities by increasing the gender representation on city, county, and state boards and commissions. The Appointments Project is a network dedicated to convening and educating women on the importance of their representation on boards and commissions, connecting women to one another and celebrating their wins. You can learn more at united-we.org. We also have upcoming our signature annual fundraising event on September 26th, and we will be featuring keynote speaker Mara Liasson from NPR. She'll be talking about truth-telling as a political journalist. So we invite you to join us for that event, hosted in person in Kansas City and live streamed nationally. So you can join us virtually wherever you are and hear more inspiration from Mara, who will share about the importance and role media plays in politics and civil discourse in our lives. We hope to see you there. Back to you, Dr. Jan.
Thank you. Beyond listening to our upcoming audio vignette series, we hope you can all join us in Austin, Texas on October 15th through 17th for the National Women's Business Conference. We'll be powering our dreams and delivering a uniquely fun and impactful experience infused with connectivity, inspiration, learning, resources, and more. So please join us. Thank you all. We hope to see you at another event very soon, and have an amazing day.